Hey, everybody, welcome back to Your Full Crew podcast. I'm Dawn Zoldai, CEO of P3 Tech Consulting and one of your co hosts.
And I'm Mike Peel, your other co-host. We're going to be talking about some great things today, including AI transparency, building roads and infrastructure on the moon, who owns the airspace, and is Meta's Threads already failing? We've got some great guests to talk about these things today, and let's start with our first one. Joe, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Mike. My name is Joe Landon, and I'm the CEO of Crescent Space. And Crescent is a new commercial company formed by Lockheed Martin to provide commercial infrastructure services at the moon and beyond. And we're building the Parsec network, which is a constellation of satellites at the moon to provide high-speed communications, navigation, and timing services for missions that are on and around the moon.
So excited to be talking about space for sure, especially practical matters in space. But we also have practical matters in AI, and that's Rom. So Rom, introduce yourself.
Hi, thanks, Michael. I'm Rommel Martínez, the CTO of ASTN Group. We're developing state-of-the-art artificial intelligence that's not based on current models, current trends. It's not based on statistics. So we're trying to push the envelope on what can be done. How far are we to through consciousness? So that's a long path, and we're trying to make the baby steps to reach it.
All right, cool. So I'm sure that'll come up a little bit more when we get to your article, but actually first we're going to start with Joe's, which is How Space Companies Plan to Build Roads and Bases on the Moon. Cool article by Motherboard on Vice. So Joe, tell us what this article is about and why you thought it was important.
Sure. Yeah. So the article talks about how several companies, commercial companies, previewed their plans to build infrastructure on the moon, and this was from a recap from the 2023 Human to Mars Summit, which took place in Washington D.C. About a month ago. So that Human to Mars Summit is an annual conference on human space exploration and organized by the nonprofit Explore Mars. And what I found really interesting was how this summit this year focused on infrastructure, and it really is following along the theme that NASA is focused on establishing long-term human presence at the moon through the Artemis program. And Artemis is a global enterprise with over 24 other countries partnered with the U.S. to return astronauts to the lunar surface this decade and to develop a sustainable presence on the moon for science and exploration. So, what does infrastructure on the moon mean? And some of in the article talked about some companies focused on roads and landing pads and buildings. But I want to back up even further. So there's some infrastructure that we take for granted here on Earth. Things like basic things like GPS, like knowing where we are and knowing what time it is. Right? We can't take that for granted at the moon. Every space mission has to be completely self-sufficient and bring everything it needs with it, including it needs to be able to figure out where it is, it needs to know what time it is, it needs to communicate back to Earth. And I thought it was interesting that we're talking about roads and buildings and all that stuff is really important, but if you don't know where you are, what time it is, that's really step zero for building other infrastructure. And then also to enable regular commerce and logistics on the moon, you really need that core infrastructure, right? You need to be able to, it's like when you going to the moon is like moving into a new apartment, right? What are the first things you do when you rent a new apartment? You call connect the power, connect your phone, connect your internet, right? You can turn on the water. Like those are basic things you have to do, and we have to think about that when we're doing exploration as well. So power generation, communications, position navigation, and timing. And even just like awareness of what's going on, and we'll talk about air traffic and airspace later with the other article. So that's a concern, flying around the moon as well. So I think just to wrap up on the article summary, infrastructure is a big opportunity. Because it's essential for science and exploration, but I think it can be done commercially. And NASA is really investing in programs and really encouraging commercial companies to come in and create opportunities to create this commercial infrastructure. And then having a core common infrastructure at the moon makes every mission easier and less costly. So that will drive more activity and really help grow the lunar economy that I think is coming.
Yeah, so hopefully if you build it, they will come. Ram, what do you what do you think about the article?
Yeah, that opens new doors. So um, it's right to point that there's so many things that here that we take for granted. Like GPS is one of the most important things that we've built, and without it, basic traveling would be nigh impossible. Also, the roads. How do we what 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 are what constitutes a good road? How do you measure it? What's the kind of strength that you need to put there? The kind of materials. How many how many years did it take us to perfect the technology of cement, which leads to good concrete? There's so many kinds of things that we take for granted, and you have to account the effect of gravity, the effect of wear and tear, the effect of radiation. So if you're building roads on the moon, what kinds of materials do you need to have in order to sustain that kind of bombardment? That's something that we cannot easily experiment here on Earth, but you need to somehow create an environment where we can simulate it. So that alone is already a huge problem that we need to solve. It may work here under certain parameters, under certain kinds of simulation, but then if you actually deploy it, which is so far here, and we discover that it doesn't work there, and it will fail catastrophically day one, then that's not a good news, right?
Yeah, no, that's a great point. I think we have, centuries of experience building roads on Earth, but we only have, a handful of missions where we even set foot on the moon, and some human missions, some robotic missions. So we really don't know. And you really hit on some key points, radiation, gravity, and materials. Like ideally on the moon, you would use the materials you have there already, because it's very expensive to bring stuff from Earth to the moon. So you have to work with what's there, but that makes a testing and a development challenge, because what's there is there, it's not here. So we have to simulate that. And NASA actually has some facilities that are we call them dirty vacuum chambers, where it's a big pressure vessel that we can suck out all the air and control the temperature to simulate space and the moon. But we actually just throw in a whole bunch of simulated lunar dirt inside that vacuum chamber to test out systems. So that's some of the other investments that come along with the Artemis program.
Yeah, I was going to say I learned a lot from this article, including that lunar dirt is called regolith.
Yep.
So interesting, and that's what they plan to make the roads and bricks from. And Joe, I don't know if you're talking about NASA's Johnson Space Center in Houston and their Mars Dune Alpha area that they've created.
Mm-hmm.
But this company, one of the companies featured in this article called Icon, plans to 3D print and do additive manufacturing, using this regolith dirt. And interestingly enough, they're going to have 4 volunteers that are going to move into this Mars Dune Alpha base and live there for an entire year soon. And to me, it's just like, whoa, I remember the movie, what was it called, with Mars, right? The one with
The Martian.
The Martian. Yeah. Of course, he was like MacGyver, on
Right.
on Mars doing all this kind of stuff and whatnot. But the other interesting thing that Joe, I think people that are not immersed in the space industry as you are don't fully appreciate, this idea that the moon is not only in and of itself important to us, but it's a gateway to places like Mars and other places in the galaxy. And so that's why NASA is so focused on these public-private partnerships and helping build out this infrastructure, because it's going to be literally a launch pad for further exploration of space. And so I learned a lot actually at this year's Space Symposium. That's where I met Joe and some of his Lockheed Martin colleagues there. And fun fact, I also wrote an article about Parsec and what Joe is doing. It was in Inside GNSS magazine. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. But this is really cool. The fact that they're building bricks, they're building roads with this regolith, or that's the plan. and then people are moving into like a vacuum chamber for a year to kind of test it out. So, Mike, what do you think?
Well, I'm kind of like two frames of mind here that I'm thinking about. So why not build towards an environment that's successful for robots first? Is that really kind of the goal here, right? So you actually have the infrastructure to then build for human occupancy, because what are we this is the real question I'm kind of getting to. Why would we use the moon as a launch pad rather than taking a beeline for Mars, considering at least it has an atmosphere? So there might be more similarities there. What are we gaining by using the moon as like a foot into space?
Yeah, so the moon and Mars are very different. There's benefits and different challenges, to each. The one key factor about the moon is that it's just so much closer. So even like how do we get things to Mars is a really big challenge, whereas the moon is only a few days away for either people or robots. So a lot of the systems and technology and processes, even business processes, and how do we run these programs and how do we build these businesses, we can test out with a lot. More frequent feedback at the moon, so that when we make that big journey to Mars, which is challenging and risky, we've got some experience under our belt.
So it actually just is less about extraction or building on the moon, and more actually testing, can we move infrastructure? Can we create the transportation mechanism to a stellar body, period?
Right.
And make it at least somewhat beneficial to businesses so that they're willing to invest in building this technology out in the first place.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's also unique scientific value of exploring the moon in itself, same as Mars, right? So we want to understand the moon. It's our closest celestial neighbor. It really helps us to understand the history of the solar system and the history of Earth. So there's unique science value, and also it's like I said, it's a very nearby location to go test out some of these other processes. When we do go to Mars, there are differences, right? There's an atmosphere on Mars, so that helps in some ways and hurts in others. So we'll have to adapt and change some of the things that we develop for the moon. But overall, we'll be a lot better off having gone to the moon first.
Were there any timelines assigned to these things? Because a lot of these are lofty goals, right? They have to be long-term goals, because the nature of the lift is supremely heavy, literally out of the atmosphere, right? So how do you keep everybody's head or eyes focused on the same goal when it is such a heavy lift? Like what are the kind of, like, are there any like holes in the ground, like we have to reach this first, we have to reach that next?
Yeah, I think the big, there's a couple things going on all at the same time. I think the U.S. government and NASA has done a really good job at creating this Artemis program, and it's a big global program, like I mentioned, with over 24 countries now signed on, and it takes sustained and significant government investment in these exploration and science missions in order to attract the commercial investment, and we're starting to see that happen now. So NASA set goals for within this decade to put humans back on humans back on the moon in 2025, according to the current schedule. But there are also robotic missions happening now. Even before the end of this year, we'll have additional robotic landers that some have already flown. But there are robotic landers headed to the moon this year, and there's a consistent pace of robotic missions to support those human missions as well. So we have a sort of a short-term tactical goals to get science equipment and stuff to support the human missions, and then the longer term human missions layered in there as well.
Well, great. And I'm willing to bet that AI technology will be supremely helpful for all of these things and actually creating efficiencies. So that's going to bring us to our next article, which is from Rom. So it's high time for more AI transparency. This is a topic we've been kind of talking about a little bit on this podcast for a while. So Rom, what's your expert take on this?
Yeah, so I found this article very interesting because for a long time, um, the um, the large language model LLM system that has dominated the scene has been the one from OpenAI. So initially, they were open source, And then later, as it got bigger, they decided to close off some parts of it. Of course, it grew in that direction. However, the problem with this is that as these systems grow larger, the transparency also lessens. So they become more and more like black boxes. We don't really know what's happening inside them. That's one aspect of it. Uh, only only the people in control of it can actually tweak its parameters, make changes to it. The public doesn't have any say about it. Now, recently, Meta launched its version 2 of its model called Llama. It's open source. Everybody can inspect the code. Everybody can see what it does. So that's a huge step towards making things more democratic, so to speak. So it's no longer within the control of a large organization of what happens with these kinds of systems. Now, the upside to that is that it opens more opportunities for um, developers and curious people alike to chime in and say what needs to be changed here. So more people, it's like a peer review for a broader scale. Um, Chat GPT and its base models GPT showed um, problem areas in the past months that has not been open to scrutiny by anybody outside. So with Meta's Llama, when something goes wrong, people can discuss it, people can contribute to it. Anybody with knowledge about it can chime in. So it opens windows to more active development, a faster rate of solving bugs, um, potentially wider deployment of case uses. So overall, I think that the step of Meta towards making these things open is significant, because then they're going to create a trend of how we should see AI. So I believe that moving forward, we should see AI as something that we can all chime in. Like this is the same with cars. You bought an expensive car, but you need to have an idea of what's happening inside. You need to be able to have the ability to open the hood. So previously, nobody can open the hood, only the maker of this car. So by opening the hood, and then all the other companies are going to follow suit, that's going to be the trend. No more closed hoods. And also not a single manufacturer of cars too. So it becomes more accessible to everyone.
Yeah, everybody can be distinct, but they build to the standard,
Yes.
and the standard is open and understandable and able to be troubleshooted, um, not only by other manufacturers but understood by regulators and standards bodies for multiple purposes, including safety and security, right? So Joe, what are your thoughts on the evolution of AI from basically being kind of this open source thing that researchers did to now kind of this proprietary phase? And do you see any issues kind of arising from that?
Yeah, no, it's really interesting the parallels to space, where space always has been a reliant upon government investment, and now it's switching to more commercial. And I think I guess one question is how much are these AI models largely developed by commercial funding, or is there government funding? I think that could play that could sort of sway our answer to how open or not things are. But I think what we're seeing in space, which is similar to what you're saying in AI, is like how do these companies who have to make these very large investments in these tools or systems, how do they protect that investment? Because they want to have a competitive advantage and they want to make money right from these models. So how do you balance that with the also the benefits of that transparency?
Yeah, there seems to be that OpenAI is, and others actually, are trying to create an artificial moat around a product that you can't build a moat around. And that, in fact, what happened with Llama originally, I believe it was Llama, but one of them leaked out, which allowed researchers to then do testing because they had the correct model set to compare to. If they could backwards engineer the tool by basically asking similar questions, same way that you would have done with a PC back in the day to build an IBM compatible. A lot of those were literally built by people testing each circuit and then finding how to map that and then building their own, right? So the issue was that it was doable. So this is not necessarily technology that should be proprietary, especially when you count in all of the social issues that come from LLMs specifically, like Ram had raised, that if the public doesn't have access to it, you're running into the same issues that we ran in with all of these kind of web technologies like social media. Like, why is the algorithm hidden? You know, we should be able to know why something is being taken down or put up or boosted. And what happens here is it's even worse than that, that the maker of the AI could be boosting what is they think a social outcome that should be, and you have no way to tell it until it's already impacted the population that it was going to impact, whether that be a minority population who's seeking a job, right? How their resumes are interpreted. We've already actually seen that as a negative result, is the AI was going with what worked in the past and wasn't determining by skills. It was literally going by name, because name was a big determiner of who was successful, but name is a matter of culture and location and where you grew up, right? So I think it's kind of important that the line be drawn usually at safety and security, and what we think is a bare minimum for those things for a society that we will tolerate, and then build on that. What do you got, Don?
Yeah, I mean, to Joe's point, I had the same question, Joe, because last year I was fortunate to go to the PX4 Developer Summit, and they're all about open coding for the drone ecosystem, and in particular the PX4 Autopilot, which everybody uses now, and a handful of others. And I had the same exact question, like, all right, if this is all open, how do people make money? And just walking around, Mike, what's the open robotic, what's the name of the kind of the parent conference that's part of the PX4 is kind of co-located with?
Oh no, so this year we're next to the show, because I do side work for them. They're at next to Roscon, but last year they were part of a Linux Foundation event. So
Yeah,
Linux Foundation being like the operating system you would see in almost every embedded system out there.
yeah. So I kind of got lost, honestly. My colleague and we stumbled into the Linux part, and we're walking around talking to all these companies, Microsoft, Red Hat, and all these different companies were there. And that's the question I asked them, and they said, "Oh, we have freemium." And I'm like, "Freemium? Oh, so there's free stuff. That's the open source stuff, and then they charge for their own specialized tweaks to it, whatever that happens to be." And so in the drone world, you see that where pretty much everybody is building on that autopilot system that the Drone Code Foundation and
Pixel
yeah,
standard.
you're right, that had created, but they have their own kind of nuance and twist to it. What I also didn't appreciate is what Ron brought up until I went to the PX4 Developer Summit last year, this idea of kind of crowdsourcing code and the accountability that comes along with that, and the security also, because there's always bad actors out there for sure, but the people that tap into these communities are very serious about what they do, and they hold each other accountable, and so if there is a line of code or something that's wrong, someone will quickly point that out, say, here's the fix, and then it goes out to everybody. So it seems almost counterintuitive, but it actually works. And Ron, to your point, OpenAI's ChatGPT-4 apparently got stupider, if you will. There was a recently researcher at Stanford University and UC Berkeley found that the ChatGPT 3.5 and 4 were both performing worse at solving certain math problem, answering sensitive questions, generating code, and doing visual reasoning than they had a couple months earlier, and nobody knows why. because they probably tweaked something over here and then it affected something over here. But as Ram said, only OpenAI knows about that. And, now these folks are finding the bugs, if you will, but they can't explain why they're happening and they
Well,
can't participate in the solution to fixing it. Go ahead, Ram.
Yeah, it's similar to making your own salad. So your vegetable salad, you put in the stuff that you like, your carrots, lettuce, whatever. It's nice. Okay, it works. It's delicious. Then you put your dressing. Okay, but then adding more stuff to your bowl will not necessarily make it better. So there comes
because
there
now it's
comes
trained on public data, right?
yes,
Right, like new
yes.
public data, which is trashy.
Yeah, so it has you cannot win win you can win over diminishing returns. It's a phenomenon. It's present everywhere. I'm pretty sure everybody would agree to that. So you keep putting food on your bowl, and then it comes about where it no longer tastes the same. It's no longer delicious, but you can say it has more veggies on your bowl. So there's always a ceiling to these kinds of things.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mike, I just wanted to say real quick, Ram, you didn't mention, and so I'm going to, the augmentive AI, and that's a term Ram and his colleagues created, that they're making is called Valmiz. And we had Ram on a podcast talking about what that is. So it's really cool that he's doing that. So he is an expert in AI. So it's great that you picked this article, and this is always a hot topic, right, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. And it has, we were bringing up the stochastic parrots paper writers. And one of the things that they posed even back then, and these were all people that were either let go or nicely dismissed from these large FANG companies, where they posited that you actually can't get better than the year that these LLMs were frozen in time prior to them being popular. Because now, once they are able to generate text that ends up on the internet, they are literally reducing the average of quality for all text that you could possibly mine. So it's kind of a negative effect of eating your own dog food. Anyway, which is normally a good thing.
Or salad, either way.
Right. So I just want to take a small break to thank our sponsors, CSG Strategies, Rubric Law, Drone Up, and Aero Vigilance. We thank them for their support. We also thank the audience for tuning in today. We're going to go on to our next article, which is about Facebook Threads. So we're going to stay on the FANG train. So Threads daily active user count has dropped by 70% since launch, and looks like downloads of the apps have dropped off significantly. So going from 100 million members signing on to only 30 million of them interacting puts them at around, I think, a tenth of what Twitter is, even in its current state as X. I don't know if anybody heard that news.
It was like yesterday, wasn't it?
I think it was last week, but yeah, it seems like yesterday because he's been like, it's not a joke. He's been pushing it forward. So Twitter has been renamed to X, if you haven't heard, which is not crazy to rename something, but I don't think it helps with brand recognition for something like a social network. Definitely kind of makes it harder to talk about. So I'm going to keep calling it Twitter because I still call Meta Facebook. So, but the bigger issue here is what actually makes a social network, what makes it useful in the first place. And it really is the people and why they feel driven to produce that content. And I think one of the big issues with Threads is its only reason for existing and being so popular at the start is it's not Twitter where the bad man Elon is or something like that, which is a very, very reductive narrative to launch a network on. And also, it's not a reason to stay. The biggest issue that users are finding is if it's somebody like Dawn or I who, make our living kind of promoting content on social media and on, these distributed networks, if we're putting in the work, but it doesn't get seen because only popular people are ranked, that doesn't really help. It serve our purpose. So why would we put the labor in posting there? And I think if you make the algorithm too friendly and you make sure users are never offended by anything, and they only see what the Facebook controllers, I mean, Meta controllers think they should see, and makes advertisers happier, it's ultimately just a less interesting place to be, even if it is a nice place to be. So I'm curious about everybody's thoughts about social media in general and why we're feeling the need to create new Twitters at all. Don,
I want to talk about threads. I was, I signed up pretty quickly when I heard, just because I'm like, oh, I got to get, jump on the bandwagon. And I've only been on it a handful of times. I haven't, I transferred my Instagram users over for the most part with my business, P3 Tech Consulting. But, it's a business account, and I'm just going to tell you, I don't know why this is, and Mike, maybe and I shouldn't say this, but I'm getting like horrible images constantly on threads. Like I'm getting all of these like half naked women. I'm getting a lot of Spanish speaking content, in other, obviously in Spanish. And I'm just like, why am I getting all of this? Like, it's honestly, it's not an enjoyable space for me to be in. Like, I don't want to be looking at that stuff. And the other thing from a content creation standpoint, which Mike and I are very much involved in, a lot of these marketing kind of third party like applications, let's call them, like Hootsuite, Canva, they don't connect the threads yet. So even when I schedule my posts, I can't just, when I'm putting on Instagram, I'm just going to like lob it on threads. It doesn't seem to be working right now. It hasn't been created. So, yeah, I don't know. And, maybe I'm getting all of the Spanish speaking content because apparently as of July, Brazil accounts for one of the largest numbers of installations of this app. They're at 60.1 million, which is almost a third of the users of Threads.
That would be Portuguese, though.
What's that?
Brazil would be Portuguese.
Oh, true. India and Brazil are two of the largest countries that are accounting for subscribers at this point. So, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just weird. What do you think, Joe?
Well, I'm in the same boat as Don. So I'm one of those 70 million users who rushed to sign up and then haven't really been on it that much recently on Threads. So I think, what I've found is, in social media, I mean, you want to go to the place where the cultural, political, policy discussions are happening, and I think that's still Twitter. Like, and there's, Threads is kind of a copy, but it's not compelling enough. There's nothing really unique about it. It's just another place. I will say, though, countering that is this change and the change in branding. It makes Twitter feel less familiar. So I think that might open up Twitter for disruption, right? Because people are instead of going to what they know, like what they know isn't the same anymore. It's changing. So I think that could be a mistake strategically on Twitter's point to like create an opening for others to come disrupt.
Yeah, and there's other competition. Like Blue Sky actually allows you to control your feed algorithm if you ever tried that out, but then it doesn't have the people. So it's like, I end up on Discord all the time now. Maybe the answer to Twitter sunsetting, and I think it's been overblown quite a bit, but it might diminish in relevance over time. But I think the result might be that we just don't go to anything that's like it. It's more likely that the disruption is actually disruptive rather than a copy. Right. Rom, what are your thoughts?
This is very similar to the one that happened with Mastodon months ago. Remember?
Yes.
There's a massive amount of users that move there. Okay, well, okay, it's nice. I get it. It's part of the federated universe, Fediverse they say.
Mm-hmm.
But then, it lacks the how do you say it? The appeal. It lacks the appeal. It lacks the polish. So it's also filled with plenty of technical mumbo jumbo that your grandmother wouldn't want to care knowing about. So Twitter is just like Twitter. Did you say tweets? It's the names of the sticks, the components. It's also a significant factor in determining your user base. It has to be friendly. It has to be accessible, while at the same time it doesn't diminish its technical value. So Twitter has all of those things. That's why many people who moved to Mastodon went back. So there were people
Hmm.
who were even strongly against the policies of Musk, but they still stayed there in Twitter.
Yeah, because the people that you know are there, right? And that's I think is kind of the fault in any social media strategy. If you're going to try to replace something that's as old as Twitter, how do you replace the people? We actually saw, did we bring this up on the podcast? Like Reddit, their CEO put his foot in his mouth, kind of talking about the mods, called them like landed gentry or something like that. Kind of misunderstanding that the health of that network is not a website infrastructure that literally they could teach you in a YouTube video in 13 minutes how to build, but the mods, the people that actually and the posters, the people that actually come there to produce the content and manage the content. And yeah, I just don't think you can recreate that artificially so fast. Like Facebook, I think people were hoping on some level like they had the best in to this kind of route because they were able to take all the users from Instagram easily. But honestly, Instagram users are low value users to a business. So that's first thing. Secondly, the lack of news content on purpose immediately reduces the urgency to check a text-based app. You know, we have all these other mediums that are a lot more visceral and entertaining, and ways of communicating that aren't text-based, where text is really for conveying information fast. So if you're taking out one of the main reasons people do that, like who cares if, like, I don't know, Taylor Swift is making a banana split and is telling you how tasty it is. Like, that's not an interesting post. That doesn't add value to my day. I'm not coming back to it. And it seems, I think, Dom, what's happening to you is that clever users are figuring out how to hack the algorithm. And that's why you're seeing more trash content already less than a month into the platform. What are you
Yeah,
going to say, Ron?
total trash. Go ahead, Rom.
And another important word to bring in here is expectation. So when you go to McDonald's, what are your expectations? There are already set expectations there. So when you use when you join a community like Threads, you already have expectations going in. It's not as if you're completely void of these things. But when those expectations are not met, things will not go well for them. So this is the same thing with, it's there's a big yellow M there. You know what they have. You know what's in there. Even if you haven't been in this specific store.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you're
you know
cracking
what
me
to
up,
expect
Rom.
before you walk in.
Oh, I was going to say, Mike, I was just thinking, Threads, it ain't no Big Mac, right? Like, so this is kind of where we are with it. And Mike, I agree with you. This idea that, they allow this kind of push a button, every Instagram follower of yours went into your Threads, followership. But you're right. Like, those followers are like, I mean, it's such a different platform, Instagram, than Twitter. And to just kind of bring all of those people over from Instagram, if you will, to Threads doesn't might have given you some great, million, $100 million, users, but are they the right users and for what you're trying to achieve or what you're trying to learn on that app? And I agree. I don't think it looked good in the beginning, but I don't think it's going to pan out. We'll see.
Well, you know how like Clubhouse has been like a sketchy situation lately.
Oh
You're
my
like, are they going to
gosh.
make a breaking change that screws us, right?
Yes.
And I think this is very similar. It's like people who need to throw money at things are telling you, hey, remember that thing in the past? It's the future. Like audio only is the future. Text only is the future. These things are not the future. I'm sorry. We have real innovators out there and we should support them. But, heralding Mark Zuckerberg who might be one of the biggest villains in tech, if you ask me. That's a personal opinion, as like somehow like the savior of social media, because he cloned Twitter overnight is just weird. I don't know. It was a weird take. I think we'll be over that hallucination in about a month or so.
I'm still waiting for the cage match.
Yeah. The cage match would have been the best result of the whole saga. So new FAA fact sheet clears the air on local drone regulation. So this is big, Don. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, this is huge, everybody. So this just kind of eked out. Nobody really talked about it, except for Wiley Ryan Law Firm. Put out this great article on their Wiley Connect. So you see the authors here, picture Josh Turner and Sarah Baxenberg. But this kind of harkens back to this idea of who owns the air, which has been super controversial, since drones kind of continue to proliferate. And we're talking low-level airspace. We're talking neighborhoods near you, seeing drone deliveries and maybe flying over your backyard, people concerned about privacy, etc. And so back in 2015, the FAA Office of General Counsel had put out an opinion basically talking about this idea of preemption. For those that aren't familiar with the law, it really emanates from the Constitution Supremacy Clause, this idea that federal law will basically make any contrary similar state law void in certain circumstances. And so, states had gone out, they started legislating in the area of drones, and there was a lot of kind of consternation, controversy over who owns the air at the low level. I mean, everybody agreed, takeoff, landing, it's on the ground, property law is clearly within the state's purview. They can tell you where you can take off, they can tell you where you can land. But when it comes to that low level airspace, well, who's in control? And we heard a lot of discussions about corridors, air toll roads in the sky in the future and all of these things. And one of the cases that people really, really got energized about was a case from the 1940s. This is a United States Supreme Court case called Cosby. It was actually a Fifth Amendment takings case, eminent domain. So what happened here is the Cosbys owned a chicken farm. It was in World War II. It was right within the pathway of the takeoff and landing zone. The noise from the airplanes and all the increased activities literally made the chickens go crazy. They wound up running into walls and killing themselves. And so it was really the first case of their kind, about basically kind of who owns the air. If the government interferes with your use and enjoyment of your property, do they owe you some money? Because now what they've done is they've essentially taken air rights from you. And in that case, the answer was yes. And the Cosbys got some money. And I don't know if they raised something other than chickens. But what this fact sheet basically says is Cosby is good to go. Like at the state level, it is not preempted for states to legislate aerial trespass, aerial nuisance. And so, man, this is way bigger than trespass and nuisance when you think about it. Because this is also saying, and by the way, what they also said in this paper, and they said a lot, so I commend you to read the actual fact sheet. What they said was the FAA basically controls these air corridors. Like that's their lane. But at the same time, the states have the ability to legislate with regards to the use and enjoyment of people's property. Now think about this. They validated Cosby in this context. Here's why it's important. When drone delivery becomes pervasive and they start making corridors in the sky like the FAA's and NASA's UAS traffic management concepts of operation talk about, if those corridors are interfering with people's use and enjoyment, now the government may have to pay those people, right? That's what Fifth Amendment eminent domain is about, is they can take your property, if you will, right? The government, but they have to provide just compensation. And so this opens a whole can of worms that I don't know that people fully appreciate. but it does provide some clarity where there was none before. I think it at the same time provides a lot of gray area as to what the future will be when these things really do come to pass. So that's all I'll say about it. Super excited that this is out there. I know I'm geeking out on the law, but this is really important stuff.
Well, it's a fundamental shift, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people, especially in the industry, even the individual pilots, were hoping for a federal blanket control on
Of
this,
everything.
right? But
yeah,
on everything. And I remember kind of early, and we could probably speak about it a little bit more detailed now, because they're kind of out of business. AirMap was originally, to the best of my knowledge, more about giving the individual property owner right, and then it turned into a pilot-focused app. And it kind of, to see that evolution, it was quick because the narrative in the drone industry to suppress like issues around like peeping toms and things like that, the industry really, really wanted to make sure the federal government was in charge of this. So, but it does open up like a big, or it gives the government a big hammer to really kind of swap down your right to your backyard, right? Like I can't sunbathe in my backyard because somebody might be able to fly over it. That's a question that I think has an answer, but it really, I think what happened here is it's understanding that that's a local question, right? Rather than a federal question. And that's a giant shift.
Yep.
Any comments or questions from?
Yeah, I think, as a business person and entrepreneur, I mean, regulation is important. I think sometimes, having a clear, stable set of rules like really enables investments. I think that maybe the FAA is trying to, provide that stability here. But, I don't know all the nuances of the law here, but I think that is helpful to think about and to think about safety, security, privacy, those like big issues, and to start to create a framework that can be stable. I think there's still like, if we can almost like rule out like, okay, we're going to be stable, we're going to have stability in these areas. There's still other areas to figure out, but that I think is going in the right direction.
Rob Jones, I think he tried to type something, but he only got out I. So give it another shot, Rob. We're here to answer your questions.
This
Rom,
is going to fire people.
Did you have anything?
Rom had a comment, I think.
Yeah, so with land, you can draw a strict line between of ownership. So this is for country X and country Y. It's clear, right? For a parcel of land, this set square meters. Okay, so that's for the flat horizontal space. Now, how about, do we have a similar system for the air? So from the ground up to the tip of the Earth's atmosphere. So let's go back to the land. So when you own this piece of land, how much of this land do you own? Does it go all the way to the Earth's core?
Now you're talking water rights. Right. Oh, my mind is blown. I'm not a water rights attorney.
And we also learned that NASA didn't have space rights, or not NASA. Was it the FAA didn't have rights over space, right?
Oh yeah, right.
They were trying to like increase the altitude a couple months ago. So we got a question from Christopher Jensen. Is the law you own the airspace? Because this is I bring it up now, Ron, because it's relevant. Is the law you own in the airspace to the highest structure on your property? So if on state property, you could have state-controlled radio towers up to 400 feet.
Okay, so a lot of this is going to depend on state law and kind of what their building codes are and things like that. What the Cosby case and what the FAA is saying is that, and Ron, to your point also, there's not like a 200 foot, a 400 foot, a 6,000 foot, above ground level cap on, you own this, or you own the air over your property into space. What they've done is they've tied the test to a property law concept basically, and also kind of this Fifth Amendment concept in a way combined. It's this idea of the use and enjoyment of your actual property. So that fairly embraces, visual nuisances, audio of nuisances, things that are loud, that are disturbing, your quiet time, and things like this. So, Chris, there's no like bright line rule, like X number of feet over your building. There's definitely some Fifth Amendment cases about this with regards to air rights. In fact, Professor Troy Rule was one of the first legal minds to talk about this. Has excellent scholarly articles that kind of outline all of these different cases. But this is, as Mike said, this is significant because it's the first time the FAA has come out and said, Cosby, applies, that the states have the ability to regulate basically aerial trespass, that people do have air rights, and at the same time, we as the FAA control the airspace. And so you still have, again, to Joe's point, that while there's some clarity there, there's still a lot of gray. Because if they, if the FAA says we're going to create a corridor here in let's say in Texas, where Chris is at, we're going to create this corridor here, and so let's just say it's not over a public highway. Let's just say it's going to go right through a homeowners association and a bunch of houses. Now it starts disturbing all those people, and that state has some kind of an aerial trespass statute on the books. I think there's a civil cause of action, and I think they could go after the FAA and the federal government and say, look, you've essentially taken my property. That's eminent domain. You owe me money also. So just, I think the eminent domain issue would supersede any civil cause of action. In other words, drone ups flying through that corridor, they're not going to be able to sue drone up time and time again. Once the feds take it over, it is what it is. But it's not going to really endear neighborhoods and the public if these corridors are not crafted in a way that, back to our infrastructure conversation in the beginning of this show, are not tracking already existing infrastructure. Because people already are used to noise around highways and roads. You start carving them through people's neighborhoods, over public parks and things like this. Now you're in a whole different ballpark.
Yeah,
no pun intended.
That's kind of was my thoughts, was like it kind of almost boils down to a zoning issue, right? Like zoning is what controls the height of buildings in your city probably right now, or your small city,
and that's
or
all
the
local.
signage that they're allowed to put up there, or how high they could put a tower on top of the building, or whether or not they could put cell tower infrastructure on top of a building, or if that has to be separate. So yeah, I think, though, this is kind of like an admission that's gonna matter for public acceptance, and to kind of stop the back and forth. It does open up a can of worms, though. You're not going to get carte blanche like the perception was maybe half a decade ago, which is what the industry would be aiming for. But I think this keeps the industry a little bit more honest. Like, all right, the drones are going to have to be relatively quiet. We're not going to actually, I think one of the reasons Google got into the market was they were hoping that they could just use that near field geolocation data and then roll that back into ads somehow. I think based on the local laws, depending on state to state, they might not be able to even use that camera data other than for onboard computer vision navigation. You could easily see how that snowballs down that direction. Any final questions before we close this one up? Dawn, final thoughts on the issue?
No, like Mike, just to echo your comment. I mean, this is really big, and if you're part of this industry and you haven't read this fact sheet, you really need to. I wasn't able to get into all the nuances of it, nor was the Wiley team in their article. So always go to the primary source, read the fact sheet for yourself. And, I think it's going to generate some great commentary and discussions this week, Mike, in Baltimore, Maryland, the FAA is holding their drone symposium. I'm hopping on a plane this afternoon. Later in the week, kind of 2 for 1, their AAM, Advanced Air Mobility Summit. So really, really looking forward to hear what people have to say about this.
Yeah, that's going to be exciting seeing you live from there tomorrow and Thursday, right? And then you got Donna Drones in between.
And,
so I just
yep.
want to thank our guests, both Joe and Rom, for joining us today and providing some great commentary and insights, some good questions too. Thank you to our audience for participating in the show today. And Rob, sorry we couldn't get to whatever your thought was, but feel free to send it to me or Dawn on LinkedIn. I also want to thank our sponsors, CSG Strategies, Aero Vigilance, Drone Up, and Rubric Law. Their support makes this show possible. That's it for this week. We are out here.